Beneath the shade of Spanish moss and the sound of distant bells, Savannah holds a story that was never meant to be found. A story written in stolen glances, hidden letters, and the dangerous kind of love that defied an entire world. Welcome to one of the most haunting and unsettling stories ever told in Savannah, Georgia. The year was 1839, when the city was still known as the Jewel of the South. Its streets were shaded by towering oak trees draped in heavy Spanish moss, their shadows stretching long across the cobblestone paths. The warm, humid air carried whispers and rumors that drifted from the grand mansions on Abercorn Street to the quiet servant quarters hidden behind them. It all began with a small notice in the Savannah Morning Republican on April 3, 1839. It was short, easy to overlook. A simple announcement of a marriage license granted to widow Elizabeth Thornton, age 42, and James Bennett, age 26. What the paper didn't mention was the detail that shocked everyone who later read the name. Only a short time before, James Bennett had been considered property, not a person, on the Thornton plantation. The scandal that followed would not only destroy the Thornton family's reputation, but would also pull back the curtain on secrets buried deep beneath Savannah's polite, polished society. Elizabeth Thornton, born Elizabeth Montgomery, belonged to one of Georgia's oldest and most respected families. Her grandfather had arrived in the colony in 1733 alongside General Oglethorpe himself. Over generations, the Montgomerys grew rich from the rice plantations lining the Savannah River. Wealth built on the unpaid labor of hundreds of enslaved people. Elizabeth was raised in comfort and refinement within the Montgomery family's grand three-story home on Reynolds Square. Parish records from Christ Church Episcopal show that she was married at just 17 to Richard Thornton, a widower 28 years her senior who owned a vast cotton plantation outside the city. Their union joined two of Georgia's most powerful and wealthy families. Richard's first wife had died during childbirth, leaving behind a young son named William, only 5 years younger than his new stepmother. According to the Journal of Mary Benny, a cousin who visited the plantation in the summer of 1826, the Thornton household was run with quiet discipline. Mary wrote that Elizabeth seemed delicate in appearance, yet ruled her home firmly, maintaining strict order among the servants. Richard, she noted, was a man of few words, and when he did speak at meals, an uneasy silence often followed. Those close to the family said Richard was often away on business trips to Charleston or Augusta, leaving Elizabeth in charge of the sprawling estate. Few people knew how much time she spent with a house servant named Grace, mentioned frequently in household records. Grace had arrived in 1822, purchased from a trader in Charleston. She did not come alone. With her came a young son, a boy of 9 named James. By 1835, tax documents from Chatham County listed 47 enslaved individuals living on the Thornton plantation. Among them, James Bennett was recorded as a house servant, one of only 4 given that distinction. Most others worked long days in the fields, their identities reduced to numbers in the plantation's ledgers. But James's name appeared again and again in household records, first as Grace's boy, later as simply James, and finally as James Bennett. The appearance of a surname was rare and has puzzled historians for generations. Dr. Eleanor Hammond, who studied the Thornton papers in 1963 before they mysteriously disappeared from the Georgia Historical Society archives, wrote in her manuscript Whispers from Reynolds Square that James had been taught to read and write, an extraordinary fact for a man in his position. The ledgers, she noted, showed purchases of books, slates, and pencils specifically marked for J.B.'s instruction. When Richard Thornton died during the yellow fever outbreak of 1836, his will left his vast estate to Elizabeth, with a separate inheritance set aside for his son William. One clause in that will stood out above all others. The servant James Bennett shall remain in the employ of my wife, and shall not be sold or transferred under any circumstances. That clause would later become the center of heated legal and moral debates when the scandal broke. Elizabeth observed exactly 1 year of mourning before returning to public life. Neighbors noticed that the estate continued to run flawlessly even after the master's death. But during that time, small things began to stir suspicion. Margaret Habersham, a neighbor, later told investigators she had seen Elizabeth and James walking together in the gardens, not like mistress and servant, but like equals, even companions. A former kitchen maid, Sarah Johnson, testified that she once entered the study without knocking and found them standing close together. James pulled his hand away from her arm so fast, she said. They looked like they'd been caught by fire. Mrs. Thornton sent me away at once, but her face was red like I'd never seen it before. As seasons turned, winter to spring, spring to summer, the house grew quieter. Elizabeth stopped attending social events and church gatherings. Her cousin, Thomas Montgomery, wrote in a letter that he visited her in early 1838 and found her changed, distracted yet strangely cheerful, and dressed far more simply than usual. He wrote that James served them tea, and Elizabeth spoke to him with an ease that unsettled him. She said she had never felt more alive, he wrote. There was something in her eyes I did not recognize, something like secret joy. That same year, a series of urgent letters began between William Thornton and his uncle, Judge Henry Thornton. In December 1838, William wrote that he had heard troubling reports about his stepmother's behavior and planned to visit the plantation unannounced. Judge Henry urged caution in his reply, but warned, "There are whispers in certain circles. It would be wise to settle this privately before it becomes a public scandal." William arrived at the plantation on January 15, 1839, during a cold rainstorm. The next morning, the sheriff was summoned after what reports later described as a disturbance of serious nature. The details of that night were never fully recorded. All that is known is that William left before dawn and went straight to the sheriff's office. By noon, James Bennet had been arrested on charges that were later dropped. Elizabeth was never arrested, but was quietly told by church leaders to refrain from attending services for a period of reflection. 6 weeks later, silence turned into shock. The Savannah Morning Republican printed a new notice: the marriage of Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennet. Somehow, Elizabeth had obtained legal freedom papers for James, and in an act of quiet defiance, she married him in a private ceremony led by Reverend John Baker, a Methodist minister known for his abolitionist beliefs. The ceremony did not take place in a church, but inside the Thornton home, witnessed only by Grace, James's mother, and a visiting lawyer from Philadelphia named Samuel Cooper. Records show that Cooper stayed only 2 nights in Savannah before leaving for the north, never to return. The city's reaction was immediate and merciless. The Savannah City Council held an emergency session on April 5, 1839, to address what they called a moral crisis threatening the order of society. William Thornton filed a petition declaring his stepmother mentally unfit and sought to seize control of the family estate. Judge Henry excused himself from the case because of his relation, but privately wrote to the governor begging for guidance. The Montgomery family publicly disowned Elizabeth, publishing notices across Georgia and South Carolina declaring that she was no longer recognized as kin. Much of what happened next has been pieced together only through scattered accounts, since many official documents were deliberately destroyed, an apparent attempt to erase the scandal from history. In 1954, during renovations of an old home on Broughton Street, a letter was discovered hidden behind a wall panel. It was written by someone who called himself a witness to infamy. The letter described what took place next. On the night of April 10th, 12 men rode to the Thornton plantation carrying torches, demanding that James Bennet come out to face justice. But it was Elizabeth who stepped onto the porch, holding a shotgun in her hands. "This is my home and my choice," she said. "Leave now or face what comes." The look in her eyes, the letter said, made even the most furious among them hesitate. The men withdrew that night, but they returned 2 days later, this time with the sheriff. When they entered the house, it was silent and empty. Furniture stood covered with white sheets as though packed away with care, not abandoned in haste. In one small room off the library, once James's study, there was nothing left at all, no papers, no books, no trace of their presence. Former maid Sarah Johnson later said that Elizabeth had taught James to read and write in that very room and that they spent many evenings there together. "They cleared it out completely," she said. "Not a thing left to show what had happened." The disappearance of Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennet became what newspapers called the Great Savannah Mystery. Rewards were offered. Rumors spread across Georgia. Some believed they fled north with the help of abolitionists. Others whispered they were lost at sea. A few swore the two still haunted the ruins of the old plantation, but no proof ever surfaced. Only silence and speculation that drifted through Savannah's history like a ghost that refused to fade. Authorities described it as the largest missing person search in Chatham County's history. Ports were guarded, roads watched, and nearby states alerted. William Thornton even hired private detectives from as far as New York to trace their steps. Yet despite all efforts, no verified sighting was ever made. It was as if they had vanished into the warm Georgia air. Still, the rumors persisted. A train worker in Charleston claimed he had seen a white woman and a well-dressed black man boarding a northbound train. A ship captain in Wilmington, Delaware, later reported that he might have transported a mixed-race couple to Boston that same spring. Months later, a banker in Montreal said that a woman resembling Elizabeth had attempted to withdraw funds using papers signed by a Philadelphia lawyer named Samuel Cooper. As years passed and no answers emerged, the scandal transformed into legend, a whispered tale told to young Southern women as both a warning and a mystery. The Thornton estate soon decayed and fell to ruin. After gaining full control of the property in October 1839, William sold it to a family from Virginia and never returned to Savannah. What became of the 46 enslaved people left behind remains uncertain, though a document found in the Chatham County archives shows that some were later sold to a plantation in Alabama. Grace, the mother of James, was not listed among them, and so the story might have ended, forgotten, buried like so many secrets of that time, if not for what was discovered 5 years later. In 1844, when workers were repairing the old Thornton house for its new owners, they uncovered something deeply unsettling hidden beneath the floorboards of a small study. Wrapped carefully in oilcloth was a worn, leather-bound journal. The book was handed over to local officials and soon came into the possession of Judge Henry Thornton, who reportedly read the entire thing in one sitting before locking it away inside his private safe. 3 weeks later, the judge died from what doctors called apoplexy, a sudden stroke, likely brought on by severe emotional distress. The contents of the journal were never made public. After his death, his widow claimed she had burned the book without ever opening it, calling it a dangerous thing that carried corruption within its pages. Yet, before its destruction, the judge's clerk, a young man named Thomas Wilberforce, later confessed that he had secretly copied certain portions. Wilberforce eventually moved to Boston, where he became active in abolitionist circles, and in 1861 he shared those copied passages with a Harvard researcher. The researcher's notes, found in Harvard's archives in 1958, stated that the journal had belonged to Elizabeth Thornton and contained entries dating back to 1822, the year Grace and her young son James first came to the plantation. The earliest entries revealed Elizabeth's growing fascination with the boy. "The child shows great intelligence," she wrote. "I may indulge my curiosity too much, but there is something in his eyes, a sharpness, a quick mind, that I have not seen in any other child, white or black." Today I showed him my book of pressed flowers, and he remembered each name after hearing it only once. Later pages told of Elizabeth's decision to secretly teach him to read, even after her husband had strictly forbidden it. "I would be furious if he knew," she wrote, "but what harm can come from learning? The boy soaks up every word I show him. He reminds me of myself when I was young, before they told me that a lady's lessons should be only about manners and charm, not knowledge." As the years went by, her writing became more personal, even confessional. A page from 1830, when James was about 17, read, "I find myself waiting to see him in the mornings, watching how the light touches his face as he works in the garden below my window. I tell myself it is pride, nothing more, but I fear it is something deeper, something I dare not name." By 1835, just before her husband's death, another entry said, "We spoke of poetry today. As he recited Byron, I no longer saw the boy I once taught, but the man he has become. I closed the book and sent him away. Later I cried, though I do not know why." The most revealing passages, according to the Harvard notes, were written after Richard Thornton's death. "With R gone, the house feels different. Jay and I walked through the garden at dusk, talking about the fields. For the first time, I asked what he thought, not out of politeness, but because I truly wanted to know. Our hands touched while we looked at a damaged camellia bloom. Neither of us spoke of it, yet neither of us moved away. Later, we stopped pretending. When the house is quiet and the doors locked, he comes to the library. We read and talk, and I feel seen in a way I never imagined possible. He understands my heart more than anyone ever has. I have begun asking about laws in other states. There must be a place where we can live without fear." The last copied entry was dated March 30th, 1839, only days before their marriage announcement appeared in the local paper. "Tomorrow everything changes. Sam Cooper has secured the papers. Once the ceremony is complete, we must go at once. Jay fears for his mother, but she insists on staying for now to keep up appearances until we are settled. I have sewn what jewelry and money I could into our clothes. The northern friends Sam introduced me to have prepared safe houses along our route. I know the risk, but for the first time in my life, I am choosing my own path." The Harvard researcher added a curious note. Wilberforce claimed that in 1852, while visiting Montreal, he met a woman he believed to be Elizabeth Thornton. She lived under another name in a quiet neighborhood of mixed families. When he approached her, she denied being Elizabeth but invited him for tea. During their conversation, she mentioned poetry, Byron again, which reminded him of the journal. Before leaving, he noticed a portrait on her wall of a black man dressed formally. When he asked about it, she smiled and said, "My late husband. He passed 3 years ago." Wilberforce never made the meeting public. Over time, the Thornton scandal faded from memory, buried beneath the growing national tensions that would soon lead to war. The plantation changed owners twice before it was mostly destroyed during Sherman's March to the Sea in 1864. Later, the land was divided and developed. Today, a suburban neighborhood stands where the old house once stood, and few living there know what history lies beneath their feet. The Thornton name survives only in a small side street near Abercorn and within the Georgia Historical Society archives, where researchers occasionally uncover fragments of the story by chance. In 1957, during construction of a shopping center near the old plantation grounds, workers dug up a small metal box about 3 feet underground. Inside were a cameo brooch, a pressed camellia between glass, and a folded note tied with a lock of hair. The items were sent to the Georgia Historical Society, where they remained unrecorded until 1963. That year, Dr. Ellen Hammond examined them as part of her research into the Thornton mystery. She noted that the cameo matched one mentioned in Elizabeth Thornton's wedding records. The pressed flower was a rare variety of camellia cultivated on the plantation, and the hair appeared to belong to two different people, strands intertwined together. Dr. Hammond never published her findings. Colleagues later said she became consumed by the story, convinced more evidence was still hidden. In the spring of 1963, she traveled to Montreal to follow up on the Wilberforce account. She wrote to her department chair, claiming she had made an important discovery and would soon return with proof that could change Georgia's history. 2 weeks later, her hotel room was found empty and her notes missing. The only thing left behind was a single pressed camellia laid carefully on her pillow. 3 days later, she was found in a hospital, disoriented and unable to remember what had happened or where her research had gone. After that, she abandoned the Thornton case completely and refused to discuss it again until her death in 1968. Today, the story of Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennett exists somewhere between documented history and haunting legend. Some details can be verified through court records, newspaper clippings, and preserved letters. Others remain uncertain, built from fragments, whispers, and the quiet gaps left in the record. What is certain is that in the spring of 1839, a wealthy white widow and a black man she once legally owned vanished together. They left behind a stunned society, not only because of the racial boundaries they defied, but because their connection appeared to have grown over many years, perhaps even while her husband was still alive, within a household that symbolized Southern order itself. The real mystery is not only what became of them after they disappeared, but what unfolded before, what passed between them during those long hours of teaching and learning. What words were exchanged in the stillness of the library, in glances across rooms where others saw only mistress and servant? What promises were made? And perhaps most troubling to those who later uncovered the story, how many other homes hid similar secrets behind calm and proper walls? How many other lives crossed the forbidden lines that society worked so hard to keep intact? After Dr. Hammond's death, a graduate student sorting through her belongings discovered a sealed envelope with a note asking that it not be opened until 50 years after her passing. The university administration, concerned about legal complications, ignored her request and opened it in the presence of lawyers. A staff member who later spoke anonymously in 1972 said the envelope contained a single sheet of paper. On it was an address in Montreal and the words, "They survived, they lived, their descendants walk among us still." The paper was reportedly taken by university officials and has never been made public. The address, according to that same witness, led to a cemetery. Even now, the story of Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennett surfaces occasionally in academic debates, in quiet historical journals about antebellum society, and in the whispered tales told during Savannah's ghost tours. Guides often point to a certain house near Reynolds Square, not the original Thornton home, but one nearby, and claim that on certain nights, especially in April, a faint light drifts from one room to another, as if someone were still searching for something or someone. Others say they've heard a soft voice reciting poetry, though the words are never clear. These are, of course, embellishments meant to charm visitors. Yet what remains true is this. In 1839, Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennett chose each other in a world that forbade such a choice. Rather than submit to separation, they vanished. Somewhere, perhaps hidden in an attic trunk, buried beneath a modern foundation, or tucked away in a forgotten archive, there may still rest a clue to what happened after they disappeared. The final trace of their story lost between history and legend. Until something new emerges, their tale remains one of Savannah's most haunting and thought-provoking chapters, not because of ghosts or tragedy, but because it challenged the very structure of the society they lived in. It revealed how fragile those rules truly were, and how far people were willing to go either to protect them or to defy them. As one Harvard researcher who studied Wilberforce's notes once said, "The most unsettling thing about the Thornton case is not what it reveals about two individuals, but what it suggests about the countless others whose stories never reached paper, those whose courage went unseen, whose voices were silenced, whose lives were erased from memory. How many Elizabeth Thorntons and James Bennetts lived and died across the American South, their struggles buried with them? And what does it say about a society that worked so hard to ensure such stories would never come to light?" These questions still echo through Savannah's moss-covered squares, along the quiet riverbanks, and within the spaces between history's written lines. In 1972, during the renovation of an old colonial post office in Schenectady, New York, workers uncovered a hidden compartment behind a loose brick in the basement wall. Inside was a small leather pouch holding 3 letters addressed to Mrs. Jane Bennett at an Albany address. The letters, dated from 1841 to 1843, were written in an elegant, flowing hand and signed only with the initial G. Historians later concluded that the writer was most likely Grace James, Bennett's mother, who had stayed behind in Georgia after Elizabeth and James fled north. The letters never directly mentioned Savannah or the scandal, yet they spoke of a shared acquaintance who had moved north and longed for news from home. The most revealing line appeared in the 3rd letter, dated December 18, 1843. "Our mutual friend asks after you often. Things here have grown harder since your departure. The new master is cruel. Many have been sold away. I still keep the secret you entrusted to me, though there are those who continue to question me. The item you left in my care is still safe where we agreed. When my time comes, I hope to join you in a place where people may live by their hearts rather than by the commands of others." These letters were significant not only for what they said, but because they existed at all. They hinted that Grace might have escaped north after all, challenging official records that claimed she died on the Thornton plantation in 1840. More importantly, they suggested that there had been an active network of communication, a quiet line connecting Georgia and New York, allowing messages to pass in secret despite efforts to erase every trace of Elizabeth James and their past lives. Further evidence of this secret network appeared in 1959 when a historian researching the Underground Railroad discovered account books belonging to Samuel Cooper, a Philadelphia lawyer who had once witnessed Elizabeth and James's marriage. These books, found in the archives of a Quaker meeting house in Pennsylvania, contained coded entries later interpreted as financial records tied to routes used by enslaved people seeking freedom. One entry dated June 5, 1839 read, "Special arrangement for TNB package delivered safely to Montreal. Additional funds released as agreed for 5 years of protection and silence." Dr. Marcus Williams, who studied the ledgers before they were sealed and restricted from public access in 1962, wrote in his private notes, "The Cooper accounts indicate that the Thornton-Bennett escape was not an act of sudden rebellion, but a carefully planned operation that may have taken years to design. The level of funding, enough to secure 5 years of safety and secrecy, suggests not only great resources, but remarkable foresight. One must wonder when Elizabeth Thornton first began plotting her escape from Savannah society. Was it after her husband's death, or had she started long before? This question became even more compelling in 1964, when construction workers demolishing an old rice mill near the original Thornton estate discovered a small hidden chamber beneath the floorboards. Inside lay a wooden chest containing what appeared to be teaching materials, a primer, a slate, several pencils, and a copy of Byron's collected poems. Experts dated these items to the 1820s or early 1830s before Richard Thornton's death. Most fascinating of all was a small notebook filled with handwriting practice, the same sentence written again and again in improving penmanship. "I am James Bennet. I am a man. I have a mind." At the bottom of the page, in a different hand believed to be Elizabeth's, were the words, "Excellent progress. You have earned your name today." The find suggested that Elizabeth had been secretly teaching James while her husband was still alive. The rice mill, according to plantation records, was rarely used after 1825, when newer machinery was installed closer to the main fields. That made it an ideal location for secret lessons, far enough from the main house to avoid suspicion, yet not so distant as to draw unwanted attention to Elizabeth's absences. What no one has ever determined is when or how their relationship evolved from teacher and student into something deeper. No surviving document directly confirms that connection before Richard Thornton's death. Yet a letter Elizabeth wrote to her cousin Anne Montgomery on October 18, 1834, 2 years before she became a widow, contains a cryptic passage many believe alludes to it. "I live 2 lives now. One that the world sees, where I play my part as expected, and another made of moments stolen from the day, conversations that must never be overheard, thoughts I dare not speak. It is in that hidden life that I feel most truly alive. Is it not strange to feel most real only when one must hide the most?" The double life Elizabeth described became far more difficult to maintain after her husband's death. As a widow, she would have faced sharp scrutiny, particularly regarding how she managed the plantation and those she now owned outright. Several contemporary accounts noted a visible change in her demeanor. Margaret Williams, a neighbor who kept a private diary discovered in 1957, wrote in September 1836, visited Elizabeth Thornton 6 months after her husband's passing. "She seems different in a way I cannot quite explain. There is a restless energy about her that does not suit her mourning clothes." When I remarked on how difficult it must be to run such a large estate alone, she smiled strangely and said, "I am not as alone as you might think. I left feeling uneasy, as though I had seen something not meant to be seen." As more people began to notice Elizabeth's odd behavior, James Bennet's role in the household quietly shifted. Witnesses later reported that by early 1838, James had taken on duties far beyond what was typical for someone in his position. Sarah Johnson, the kitchen maid, told investigators that he was managing plantation accounts, meeting visitors when Elizabeth was away, and even writing letters to merchants in Savannah on behalf of the estate. "He sat at the master's desk," she said, "used the master's pen, spoke with the master's confidence. And Mrs. Elizabeth, she only smiled, like she knew exactly what she was doing. It seemed the most natural thing in the world." This slow reshaping of roles, this soft blurring of the rigid lines that ruled Southern society, could not last forever without consequences. The turning point, as often mentioned, came with William Thornton's unexpected visit in January 1839. Exactly what he saw remains uncertain, but in a letter he sent to Judge Henry Thornton soon after fleeing the estate, he described it as a disturbance of natural order so deep that I could not remain under that roof another hour without fearing I might lose my composure. He claimed he found Elizabeth and James in a situation that left no room for an innocent explanation, though he avoided explicit details out of respect for the family name. Whatever occurred that day set in motion the chain of events that would end in Elizabeth and James's marriage, and later, their mysterious disappearance. What fewer people know is that during the 3 months between that visit and their wedding, Elizabeth quietly began selling off her property and moving her wealth. Records at the Bank of Savannah show that between January 20th and March 15th, 1839, she withdrew large sums of money, converting them into portable forms such as banknotes and letters of credit. She also sold several pieces of jewelry through a broker in Charleston, proven by a receipt found among Samuel Cooper's papers. Most notably, she transferred ownership of a small property she had inherited in Philadelphia to a company with Cooper listed as its sole trustee. These actions made it clear that Elizabeth was not just planning to run away. She was preparing to start an entirely new life beyond Georgia. The legal and financial steps she arranged through intermediaries across state lines show that she fully understood the danger and complexity of what she was undertaking. She and James needed not only to escape, but to build new identities in a place where their past could never reach them, where they might live freely, without fear of being hunted or condemned. The strongest proof of this careful preparation appeared in a statement from 1841 by a former clerk at a Savannah print shop. During a legal dispute over William Thornton's claim to his stepmother's estate, the clerk testified that in February 1839, a well-dressed black man, later identified as James Bennet, had ordered business cards and stationery for Mr. James Bennet, importer of fine teas and spices, with an address in Montreal. Bennet reportedly told the clerk he was arranging the order for his employer, who was expanding trade in the North. The clerk thought little of it at the time, but later realized its meaning once news of the scandal spread. Those business cards were more than a disguise. They were a glimpse into the life Elizabeth and James envisioned for themselves. A life where he would no longer be a servant, but a businessman, not property, but a respected man of trade. The choice of Montreal was deliberate. As part of British Canada, it lay beyond the reach of American slave laws. Its diverse, growing population offered safety, and its reputation as a bustling trade city made a tea and spice business entirely believable. The details of their journey from Savannah to Montreal remain mostly lost, though fragments of evidence suggest they traveled by ship to Philadelphia, where Samuel Cooper sheltered them briefly and provided new identity papers. From there, they moved north through New York and finally crossed into Canada, leaving behind everything they had known and stepping into a freedom they had risked everything to claim. Among Cooper's belongings, there was a small receipt for passage on the schooner Mary Jane from Savannah to Philadelphia, dated April 12, 1839. It listed two travelers, Mrs. E. Smith and Mr. J. Smith, described as aunt and nephew traveling on family business. What seems almost certain is that by August of that same year, a woman matching Elizabeth's description tried to withdraw funds in Montreal. Later that year, city directories listed a James Bennet, importer, with a modest shop on Rue St. Paul and a home on Rue Antoine. The following year added a Mrs. Jane Bennet at the same address. No details were given about their race or origin. Life in Montreal would have brought new challenges. Though they escaped the reach of Southern law, they now had to create believable stories about their past. Elizabeth's accent, their manners, and the way they carried themselves all had to match the identities they invented. Their business success depended not only on their skill, but also on how convincingly they could play their chosen roles. From what remains, it appears they managed remarkably well. Records from the port of Montreal show Bennet's tea and spice business remained active through the 1840s. Tax papers reveal slow but steady growth, and by 1845, they had moved to a larger storefront. Church records from a small Methodist congregation mention regular attendance and donations from Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, described as a couple of mixed background, vague enough to avoid unwanted questions. The most personal glimpse into their Montreal life comes from the diary of a young woman named Marie Leblanc, who worked in their shop between 1843 and 1845. Discovered in 1966, her journal included several notes about her employers. Madame Bennet speaks French with an American accent, she wrote, but tries very hard to improve. She is always graceful, even in plain clothes, and treats everyone kindly, whether wealthy customers or poor vendors. Mr. Bennet manages the shop with care, and they seem quietly devoted to one another. They share looks when they think no one is watching. Small signs of understanding that make me hope for the same one day. In another entry, Marie recorded an uncomfortable moment. A customer from Boston asked Mr. Bennett about his background. He said he had grown up in the South but preferred the air of Canada, both its weather and its society. The man then asked if Madame Bennett was of European descent. A silence filled the room. Mr. Bennett smiled and said, "My wife and I have found Montreal asks fewer questions, which is exactly why we chose it." The customer soon left, but I noticed Madame Bennett's hands tremble as she arranged the tea canisters, though she pretended nothing had happened. That moment revealed how fragile their safety truly was. Even in their new home, a single curious visitor from the South could have exposed them. This constant fear likely pushed them to sell their business in 1849 and move to a quieter town outside Montreal. Their old shop was taken over by a French-Canadian trader, and their home address disappeared from the city records soon after. From then on, the trail grows faint. There is no surviving proof of James Bennett's reported death from pneumonia around 1849. Only the account of Thomas Wilberforce, who said Elizabeth told him so. Death records from that period, especially outside large cities, were often incomplete. What can be confirmed is that in 1852, the year Wilberforce claimed to have met Elizabeth, a Mrs. Jane Bennett, widow, bought a small house in St. Henry, then a separate town west of Montreal. The property stayed in her name until 1867, when it was transferred to a Miss Grace Bennett, listed as her niece and sole heir. Grace's appearance in the record raises questions. There is no evidence that Elizabeth and James ever had or adopted a child. Yet the name Grace matches that of James's mother. Could she have been James's mother who somehow made her way north, or a daughter born to the couple and named after her grandmother? The second seems more likely, supported by a church record showing the confirmation in 1860 of a Grace Bennett, age 14, placing her birth around 1846, 7 years after the escape from Savannah. If true, it means their story was not only one of forbidden love, but also of a family built across the barriers of race and class that defined 19th century America. Somewhere, there may still be descendants of Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennett, unaware of the courage and quiet defiance that shaped their ancestors' lives. The last known trace of Elizabeth appears in 1869, 30 years after her scandal rocked Savannah. A small notice in a Montreal newspaper announced the death of Mrs. Jane Bennett, formerly of the United States, aged 72. The brief obituary said she was survived by her beloved granddaughter and remembered for her calm strength, her love of poetry, and her belief that all souls are equal before God. She was buried in a modest cemetery in Saint-Henri, in a grave she had purchased years earlier. Beside it was another grave, unmarked except for the years 1822-1849, the likely span of James Bennett's life. In 1963, when Dr. Elinana Hammond traveled to Montreal following Wilberforce's notes, she reportedly visited that same cemetery. Whatever she found vanished with her research papers during her mysterious 3-day disappearance. By 1970, the cemetery was relocated for city development, and the graves were moved without individual markers, erasing the last physical trace of their story. All that survives now are fragments scattered through archives in Georgia, New York, Pennsylvania, and Quebec. Testimonies passed down long after the events. Objects found under floors or hidden behind walls. Lines in diaries and letters never meant for the world to read. From these small pieces, we can glimpse something extraordinary, a quiet act of resistance against the rigid lines of race and status. What remains unclear is not what Elizabeth and James did, but who they truly were to each other. When did teacher and student become equals? When did respect turn into something deeper? What promises were whispered behind closed doors? What gave them the strength to imagine a life everyone told them was impossible? These unanswered questions fill the empty spaces between surviving records. They echo through Savannah's past, unsettling its polished image of the Old South. The story of Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennett offers no tidy ending, no moral wrapped in certainty. It reminds us of the many untold stories buried beneath official history, the quiet rebellions, the secret loyalties, the hearts that refuse to live within the boundaries drawn for them. As one Harvard researcher later wrote, "What makes the Thornton affair so haunting is not simply that it happened, but that it forces us to wonder how many others did too. If a woman of Elizabeth's standing could risk everything for such a bond, how many others felt the same, but lacked her means or her courage?" The true history of human connection across the lines of class and color in America remains mostly unwritten, existing only in scattered fragments, whispers, and silences. In 1969, the same year Dr. Hammond's sealed envelope was finally opened, an elderly woman visited the Georgia Historical Society, asking for any materials about the Thornton plantation. The archivist described her as well-dressed, in her 70s, with light brown skin and gray eyes. She spent hours reading old records, quietly taking notes. When asked about her interest, she replied that she was tracing her family roots. As she prepared to leave, she paused at the display case holding the cameo brooch and pressed flower found in 1957. She stood there silently for a long moment, then smiled. Not sadly, but as though remembering something distant yet familiar. She touched the glass lightly and said, "Some stories are better left untold, but that doesn't make them any less true." She never returned, and her name was never recorded. Like much of this tale, she remains another fragment, another echo from a past that refuses to fade away. In the end, perhaps this is what gives the Thornton Bennett story its enduring power: the persistence of human connection, the quiet refusal of love to obey the rules society sets. In a world that declared certain feelings forbidden, Elizabeth and James carved out a small space for themselves, first in secret, then in exile, and finally in memory. Even now, the fragments they left behind can still move us. In Savannah, on warm April nights when the air is heavy with jasmine and history, guides still point toward Reynolds Square and speak softly of the widow who defied her world. Some say they see lights flickering in old windows, hear faint poetry whispered, or feel a sudden chill in the warm breeze. They may just be stories meant to charm visitors seeking a touch of mystery, yet beneath them lies a deeper truth. The past is never as simple as we wish it to be. Human hearts have always resisted confinement, and perhaps somewhere, the descendants of Elizabeth Thornton and James Bennett still walk among us, carrying within them a quiet legacy of courage, tenderness, and defiance, one that time itself could never erase. Peace.